Good evening. Welcome to Toronto's Congregation of Habonim. All those who are here in person, all those who are watching online, wherever you are, and welcome to our special program commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. My name is Eli Rubenstein, and I'm a member of the clergy team here at Congregation of Habonim in Toronto, which I should add was a synagogue founded mainly by German Jewish Holocaust survivors and refugees from Europe in 1954. In fact, Habonim, which means the builders, was the first synagogue established by survivors in Canada in the aftermath of the Holocaust after World War II. Let me begin with a few verses from the book of Proverbs, the book of Mishlei, which are among perhaps the most well-known verses from this biblical book. Eshet chayal miyimtza v'rachak mibnei mimichra. A woman of valor who can find, for her price is above rubies. She girds her loins with strength and makes strong her arms. Strength and dignity are her clothing. Many daughters have done valiantly, but thou exceed them all. Grace is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears God shall be praised. Give her of the fruits of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. This evening's program is dedicated to a number of women of exceptional valor whose courageous stories will be told in the film you're about to see in a few moments. Before we continue with our film screening, I would just like to thank a few people and organizations who made this program possible this evening. Specifically, Maren Sinclair, founder of Liberation 75, as well as Whitney Karp, Associate Director of the March for Living of Canada. Given the theme of tonight's program, we're going to begin with a short musical piece sung by my colleague and dear friend, Rabbi Cantor Vivareisky, who's a longtime member of the clergy here at Congregation Habonim. The song she's about to perform is called Blessed is the Match, and is written by Chana Senich, a Jewish heroine who gave her life fighting against the Nazis during World War II. Chana Senich was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1921. After experiencing anti-Semitism as a child in her native Hungary, she made Aliyah from Hungary to the land of Israel in 1939, where she lived on a kibbutz on the seashore near Caesarea. When World War II broke out, she and other residents of Palestine volunteered to fight against the Nazis. She was trained by the British as a paratrooper and was dropped behind Nazi lines in Europe. The Nazis captured her, tortured her, and executed the 23-year-old young woman on November 7, 1944. Blessed is a Match contains the words to the last poem that Senich wrote before she was captured. The words read in English: "Blessed is a match consumed in kindling the flame. Blessed is a flame that burns in the secret places of the heart. Blessed is a heart with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is a match consumed in kindling the flame." As you probably observed, the words to this poem seem to predict her own martyrdom. I should add that the melody to Blessed is a Match was composed by Aviva, and I should also tell you that Aviva herself is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor from Czechoslovakia. Please.
Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. And blessed is the heart with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. And blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Ashrei הגפרור שנשרף והצית להבות. אשרי הלהבה שבערה בסתרי לבבות. אשרי הלבבות שידעו לחדול בכבוד. אשרי הגפרור שנשרף והצית להבות. is the heart, with the strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. And blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
Thank you, Aviva, for beginning our program with such a stirring and eloquent rendition of this beautiful poem by Chana Senesh. I would now like to invite another member of our clergy team, Rabbi Audrey Kaufman, who's going to share with us her deep personal connection with the film we're about to see and one of its main characters, Anna Heilman. Anna was a survivor of Auschwitz, and her own sister was one of the 4 women executed in the revolt in Auschwitz. Anna moved to Canada after the war and is one of the main narrators in the film Sabotage, you will see in a few moments.
Allow me to take you on a journey this evening to Edgecliff Avenue in Ottawa, a street with a deep personal connection for several of us here at Habonim. Among those connected to Edgecliff are Karen and Bernie Farber, Noreen Bosloy, Gloria Draper, Leslie Kirschenblatt, Carrie Bringberg, and myself. This is the street where Karen and I grew up, alongside my friends and Hebrew Day School classmates, Noah and Ariella Heilman. Their father, Joshua Heilman, of blessed memory, was not only my Hebrew teacher and principal at Hillel Academy, but also a profound influence throughout my formative years, perhaps even the inspiration behind my decision to become a rabbi. Their mother, Anna Heilman, also of blessed memory, was a remarkable individual and role model. In those days, children generally didn't address their friends' parents by their first names. So I'll refer to her the way I did as a child, respectfully, as Mrs. Heilman. As a child, I never heard Mrs. Heilman speak of her personal experiences during the Holocaust. It wasn't until years later, when we were both on the same March of the Living trip, that I first heard her share her story. Because of my deep connection with the Heilman family, it is a privilege to welcome Ariella Heilman this evening. Ariella has traveled from New York specifically to join us, and we are truly honored to have her here at Habonim for this important event. Tonight, Ariella will introduce the powerful film Sabotage, narrated by her mother, Mrs. Anna Heilman, and directed by Noah Aharoni. This screening is a poignant commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. We are grateful to have Ariella with us as we honor her mother's profound testimony and its enduring impact. Ariella.
Thank you, Ellie, Audrey, and Congregation Habonim for inviting me tonight. I'm honored to be with you in community on this holy day of commemoration, marking 80 years of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. That all of you chose to mark the occasion by coming to bear witness to those who survived is remarkable. Or maybe not so much, since that has been the way of our people. Like reading the Haggadah at the Seder every year, and retelling the eyewitness account of the Israelites straggling out of Egypt. Sabotage, the film, the project, that you'll see tonight is itself a miracle of survival and overcoming the obstacles that make up a Jewish existence. That Levi Zini, the producer in Israel, pulled the thread of this chapter from the mountain of testimonies, that he found the genius of Noah Aharoni to write and direct the story, that it survived the global pandemic and October 7th, these are all miracles. Finally, I would like to send a message to my countrymen in Israel, to the families who lost children on October 7th, and to the families of those still held in captivity. To the soldiers who fell or are wounded for life, this is what 80 years from now looks like. Bearing witness is our lot and our playbook. We will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariella, and thank you, Rabbi Audrey. Please now turn your attention to the moving documentary Sabotage, directed by Israeli filmmaker Noah Aharoni. What a powerful film. Truly a moving testament to the heroism of these four very courageous women and the many others who took part in the revolt at Auschwitz some 80 years ago. In a few moments from now, we're going to have a panel discussion on the subject of this film. But before that, I would like to share with you 3 very short clips from the March of the Living. The clips will feature Anna Heilman and Max Eisen, 2 Canadian survivors who participated in the march and were both eyewitnesses to the events recounted in the film. And before I show you those 3 little clips, I want to give you a little anecdote which will perhaps show you how important Anna Heilman was in the life of a Canadian Jewry. In Ottawa, there's a Holocaust monument that was inaugurated in 2017. And one of the people behind that was Minister Uppal in the Conservative government, Minister Tim Uppal, who was of the Sikh faith. And a few years back, I had a chance of meeting him, and I wanted to thank him for his advocacy for the monument, but I was kind of wondering what the connection was between him and, we do okay here? Okay, thanks, thank you very much. Thank you, Colin. Colin's one who designed the wonderful flyer for the event, so a big hand to Colin. And also an Ottawa native, all good things come from Ottawa. So I asked Minister Uppal, what made you, a person of the Sikh faith, be so interested in a Holocaust monument? And he looked at me and said, it's because of you, Mr. Rubinstein. It's because of me. I never met him before, so I figured I get blamed for things I don't deserve, I'll take the credit for it too. But he basically explained to me what happened was, he said, do you remember the 1994 March of the Living? I said, of course I do. In fact, that was the year Anna Heilman came on the trip. She had an incredible impact on all the students who went. He said, you remember Kieran Binder in the 1994 March of the Living? Yes, I do remember Kieran. Kieran was a young woman in her teens who applied to the March of the Living, but she was the first young woman to apply to the March of the Living in all of Canada who wasn't Jewish. In fact, she was a Sikh. And she was an incredible young woman, had the most amazing application. But there was a debate. Some people felt that she'd feel alienated among all the Jewish students. We ended up taking her. She was an outstanding student. She bonded very, very closely to Anna Heilman, listened to every word she said, hung on to every one of her words. I said, yes, of course I remember Kieran. She said, well, Kieran is my wife and the mother of my 3 children. And so when this idea came up for the building of the monument in Ottawa, you can imagine how much she lobbied him for that purpose. So you cast a stone upon the waters, you never know what distant shores the ripples will be felt. So the 3 clips you're going to see are 2 from Anna Heilman and 1 from Max Eisen. The first one is Anna Heilman, the second one is Max Eisen, a beloved Holocaust survivor from Toronto. And the last clip is not from Poland, it's also with Anna Heilman, is taken from the celebration of Israel's Independence Day in the streets of Jerusalem. And the clip features Anna trying to share the lessons about being in Israel after being on the march in Poland with joyous Israelis and March of the Living participants all around her. And you can see she has a little bit of a challenge, and that's a little bit of a light moment. So let's watch these 3 clips from the March of the Living. One last thing, as you're watching Anna speak to the students in Auschwitz about her experience, just look at the expressions on their faces and how important it is for the transmission of memory from one generation to the next. So please, the 3 clips now. So before I introduce the next part of the program, I just want to thank Jonathan Perlman, a filmmaker in Toronto, for filming the clips of Anna Heilman. I have to say, sometimes I face challenges as a public speaker, but I've never been hit over the head with a hammer. So if Anna can pull through that, I certainly can. I also want to thank Naomi Wise, the director of the March of the Living Digital Archives Project, who edited these March of the Living videos, as well as edited and filmed the Max Eisen clip. So now for our panel discussion, which will be moderated by my good friend and colleague, Marilyn Sinclair. A few brief words about Marilyn. Marilyn is a child survivor whose father, Ernie Weiss, also joined us on the 2008 March of the Living. In 2018, Marilyn founded Liberation 75, the largest global gathering to commemorate the 75th anniversary of liberation from the Holocaust in 2020. Since then, Liberation 75 has provided vital Holocaust education programs to almost 900,000 teachers and students across Canada, has been instrumental in changing the curriculum in Ontario. Marilyn sits on the board of the USC Shoah Foundation and as well as one of the 2 Canadian representatives on the Claims Conference Board. In 2024, Marilyn was awarded the Meritorious Service Cross by Canada's Governor General for outstanding achievement and service to the nation. Sure.
Oops, stuck. Okay, I'll do it like this. Okay, I'm going to ask our 4 panelists to come up. Would Bernie Farber, Dori Eckstein, Ariella Heilman, and Fern Levitt please come up? It's really hard to talk after that movie, and then on top of it all to see very hard to see Max Eisen after that, because so many of you, I'm sure, knew and loved Max like all of us did. Hard to see that. Just a quick note, when I was watching the unbelievable moment of the release of the 4 hostages this past weekend, it got me thinking about these 4 women. Ellie and I had, of course, screened the film in advance, and it really struck me as a parallel when I saw these 4 hostage women up on that stage, you know, being told to stand there, how strong and proud and resilient they were. It was a testament to just their absolute courage as these 4 women who went to their deaths had to face. So with that, I'll just do a quick introduction to who we have with us today. So, Habonim member Bernie Farber is a human rights advocate and a dedicated leader in combating anti-Semitism and prejudice. With over 30 years of service to the Jewish community, Bernie has worked tirelessly to preserve the memory of the Holocaust. He speaks often about his late father Max, the only Jewish survivor of his small Polish village during the Holocaust. Bernie was the past CEO of Canadian Jewish Congress and continues his work today as the founding chair of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. So we've already met Ariella. So I'm going to go on to Fern for a moment. Habonim member Fern Levitt is an award-winning documentary producer and director. Her films focus on human rights, the Holocaust, discrimination against African Americans in the US, animal welfare, and socially relevant issues. She's best known for her 2016 documentary, Sled Dogs, which explored the Iditarod, did I say that right? Iditarod, and examples of animal cruelty practiced on the sled dogs participating in the annual race. And last but not least, Dori Eckstein is a professional teacher who's been a dedicated Holocaust educator for the past 15 years. Dori is a daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. She's been an active volunteer at the Neuberger Holocaust Education Center and now the new Toronto Holocaust Museum for close to 2 decades, dedicating her time to Holocaust education, Holocaust commemorations, and advocating for survivors. Dori's pursuit of Holocaust legacy has led her to create her own Holocaust education program that pays tribute to her father and mother's stories. So I'm just going to ask each of you a couple of questions, and I'm going to start with Bernie by setting the stage. So Bernie, 13 years ago, you wrote an article about the heroism of Anna Heilman and the courage of the women of the Auschwitz munitions factory. Why did you write this article?
Well, for a couple reasons, actually. First of all, I knew the family from Ottawa, and we were very close. Ottawa Jews, it's like a secret mafia, you know. I mean, we love each other, and I knew Anna in a number of different ways. I knew her as the mother of Ariella and Noah. I also knew her as a supervisor at the Children's Aid Society of Ottawa Carleton that I worked at. And she worked actually with foster children, and taught me very, very, very much. And so when I heard the story, when Noah and Ariella first told me the story, there was no doubt that I had to write about this. Nobody heard it before. Nobody read about it before. And I just felt there was an obligation, A, as a child of a Holocaust survivor, and more importantly, as a friend of the Heilman family, there was just, that's what had to be done, and I did it. And you can get it online, by the way. If you put my name down and Anna Heilman's name down, you can get the link to it.
So after seeing this film, and as a child of a Holocaust survivor, what do you want this audience to know?
I want them to know that there was Jewish honor. Even in the death camps, there was Jewish honor. We did not go as sheep to the gas chambers. We fought back, and we fought back sometimes ferociously. And for me, knowing my father's story and knowing the Heilman story, knowing the stories of so many others, the idea that the Jews were just, like sheep, bothered me terribly. So if you take away anything, you take away the heroism of the young women, you take away the glory and the courage of Anna Heilman, and you take away the fact that Jews don't go like sheep anywhere anymore. Even back then, we did not do that.
Thank you. Ariella, when did you find out this unbelievable story about your mother?
I can't even remember when I first knew it. It was, I knew about Anne Frank, so that's really how I learned about anything to do with the Holocaust. She had a number, she had a tattoo when, I was born in Israel, and that was pretty standard. All their friends spoke Polish. They all played cards.
The microphone.
No, they switch mics.
It is on. They all played cards. They all spoke Polish. They all smoked cigarettes, and they all had tattoos. So basically, there was really nothing to know. What was interesting is that we were the oldest kids in the playground. I was born 3 years after the state of Israel. So we really had no one to learn anything from. So we just taught ourselves everything. And it was, I don't know. I mean, really, she didn't talk to my classes. I know my sister was curious, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction that I wanted to learn anything from her. And my father was a teacher, so I was really more going the opposite direction, like running away from them, not towards anything they had to teach me. They just caught up with me, really. Yeah.
How does this film make you feel?
Oh, wow. Really happy for my mother's memory, happy that she achieved something, that she really dedicated the end of her life to straightening, getting the record straight. That there were a kibbutz in Israel that was founded by townspeople of Rosa Rabota, and her story was known. And Marta actually, in her promise to Estusha, came from Belgium to Ottawa and really threw down the gauntlet and said, you have a responsibility to make sure the record is set straight. There were 4 women in this chapter, not just one. So I feel that this is a continuation of that gauntlet. You can see this was not her wish to spend her time bearing testimony, but it became more and more clear as her life went on that denial was already in the wind, and that if someone, had to tell it, it was going to be her. if I could remember it, darling, I would. There was already echoes of denial, at the end of her life, and she understood. Someone had to tell the story, it would be her. And I think particularly she was a good storyteller because of her age, because of her exposure to deaf parents, because her ability to communicate not just in 6 languages by the end of her life, but she also could sign, and her mother could lip read. And she had to translate for her mother in the market from Polish to Russian, because her mother wouldn't sign in public. She was too proud, and she didn't speak Polish. But she did speak Russian, so my mother, from a very young age, was translating so her mother could lip read. So she had the ability in many ways to communicate, and obviously a photographic memory, and she wrote a book, Never Far Away, where the things she remembers about her childhood are unbelievable. So that's what I'll say. Very, very, very gratified that this is out in the world. Thank you.
It's amazing. Thank you. How many people in the audience are children of Holocaust survivors? A lot. How many are grandchildren of Holocaust survivors? Just a few. Okay, thank you. So I'm sure all of you can appreciate what it means to have your parents' stories come out later in life when you have time to really reflect on their courage and what they went through. So thank you, Ariella. That's tremendous. So Fern, you are an acclaimed documentary filmmaker. From a filmmaker's perspective, how do you feel about this film?
I thought it was brilliant. I've made about 5 Holocaust documentaries, and this was one of the most, if not the most brilliant documentary I've ever seen. Their use of animation was extraordinary, and I thought that it was even more powerful. When I made the documentaries I made, I used archival footage from, the camps, but the use of this animation was more powerful, I felt. The use of sound, the use of music, but especially the use of animation was so powerful. And to start with that right at the beginning of the film just hooked you, absolutely hooked you. So really it was, and I heard someone around me saying it was the most powerful documentary film that they've ever heard. But I want to add something to this because watching this film is very emotional for me. And I was very lucky in the documentaries that I made over the years. I've been doing this for like 20 years. And I did documentaries. I tell the stories of people who had such courage. I don't know if you know the stories of the Little Rock Nine, who were the first to integrate an all-white school in 1957, and what they went through just for the right to go to school, or Andrei Sakharov, who was a Russian dissident, Václav Havel, who also was a dissident in Czechoslovakia and became president of Czechoslovakia when they finally won their freedom, and Mikhail Gorbachev, who, there was so much hope during his time as the Soviet leader. And I made these films for an important reason, because history teaches us so many lessons that we need to keep learning. And when I was making those films, I felt such optimism, because here were these extraordinary people who were literally changing the world. And it was just incredible to see what one person can do to bring about change. And the courage of the survivors. I did 2 films with Ellie, March of the Living and March of Remembrance and Hope. And to hear from survivors and hear from the students who went with us on these, to learn about that history, and saying we are going to learn the lessons from history to make sure never again becomes a reality. And I'm feeling, I have to tell you this, I'm feeling very discouraged. I am feeling very discouraged. I read this morning the New York Times, and there was a quote from Anne Frank. And she said, she wrote in her diaries, families are torn apart, men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find their parents have disappeared. And when I read that, I thought about what's going on in America with the immigrants and the terrible things that are being said about them. And I'm angry and discouraged and heartbroken because the Holocaust and all the suffering of the 6 million people and more, if that didn't teach us to stand up for all that are being discriminated against, then what did we learn?
Thank you, Fern. Dory, you are the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. Your father survived years in Auschwitz while your mother was saved in hiding. Dory and I, by the way, founded the Dialogue for Descendants program and really got to know so many children of Holocaust survivors over the years, which has been so meaningful to be able to hear everybody's stories and the impact that their parents' experiences had on them. On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, please tell us why and how you tell your parents' stories.
Okay, so I'll begin with why, and I'll briefly talk about my dad's experience, because my dad was, he was one of the first transports to be sent to Auschwitz. He was living in Slovakia, and if you know about the Holocaust in the history, the Slovakian Jews were the first to be transported. His father was on the 2nd transport, and his older brothers, and my dad was on like the 4th transport. So he literally was there from the very beginning, the spring of '42. And he was the strongest man I ever knew. And I draw strength from him every day because he found out that his entire family was murdered within the first week of being in Auschwitz. He met his older brother's best friend, and when he arrived within a week, and he said, "Where's my father? Where's my brothers?" And his older brother's best friend had to say, "They've all been murdered." And he knew, like everyone quickly learned, what happened to women and children. He knew his mother and his younger brothers were sent to the gas chamber. And my father said, he always repeated this, that he fell to the ground, and it's on his show as video as well, cried his eyes out, looked at God, and said, why? Why is this happening? But then he got angry and he said, I'm going to survive to tell the whole world what these Nazis, I'm going to use his terms, but I don't swear, bastard Nazis did to my family. And that was his motivation. And of course, he had a lot of luck. So I draw a lot of strength from my father. My father also was, unlike your mother, my father talked constantly about his story. So I'm one of those children of survivors who grew up listening and learning about the Holocaust from a very young age. Like, I think I was in grade 1 or 2 when I found out that my grandparents were, he called it, killed in the war. And then I didn't want to hear anymore. My dad had a very overwhelming need to share. It was his therapy. It was his way of carrying on the legacy, because he made that commitment to his family that he will survive and he will tell the story. And then in 2017, sadly, my father passed away. And 11 months later, my mom passed away. It was a very difficult time. I had grief upon grief. And I started thinking that now is the time that not only am I a museum educator at the Holocaust Center, I need to start telling my parents' stories. They're no longer alive, and sadly, more and more survivors are passing away. And even the survivors that are alive, not all of them can speak anymore, and we have very few survivors that can tell their story. So I knew it was important that the next generation take on this role, and I was ready to do it. So what I did was I created 2 PowerPoint presentations of my parents' testimonies. And I am very fortunate because I know details about both my parents' stories, because they spoke so much about it. And I'm also a teacher. So I'm very comfortable in the classroom. I understand student development, and I connect with kids. So I knew that my way of carrying on the legacy would be in the classroom.
So Dory,
Yeah.
so I want to finish up on a positive note. Can you read us some of the responses that you've received from students about your presentation?
My pleasure. Hang on. So when I present, I always ask the kids to fill out a feedback form because it's a way for them to reflect on what they've learned, what they heard during the presentations, and also a way for me to understand what impact they get. So I'm going to read 2 of the questions that I use on my feedback form, and I'm going to read some of the students' responses so you can hear. One is, what is the most important message you received after listening to Dory's presentation? So just actually did a presentation today, but I didn't get their feedback back yet. So I'm going to read one in December, grade 8 students, and these are some of the responses they wrote. You can't just stand there and watch things happen. That's one student. You have to stand up against hatred. Hate like this is never okay. Treat everyone the way you want to be treated. So another question I ask is, what did you find surprising or most interesting about David's story? David was my father. So I always find these interesting, but it also tells you a lot. That Hitler actually convinced people to hate Jews. That your dad was able to survive under these horrible conditions. And then another comment from another student, that your dad had the will to live in the concentration camp after learning his family were all murdered, which is the lesson of resilience. So the students got that. That people could gas other human beings, and that teaches them the depth of evil. So
Thank you very much, Dory. That's amazing. I want to give the final word to Ariella tonight for traveling so far to come here and in honor of your fantastic mother who was so brave and courageous. What would you like to leave us with as a message?
She loved life. She loved life, and my father loved life. And they dedicated both their careers to working with children. I think it was hard for them to really connect, with older people. And she would say, it was easy in the war. You knew who your enemy was. So it was really, I like to say that Janet's family adopted us and taught my family Canadian. We all spoke English, but it's a whole nother cultural layer and level, and through their whole lives, My father did better than my mother. She was always checking us on the side eye. And she also had this Polish accent that the V's and the W's just confused her for life. She'd always just say, "You're very welcome." And she'd look at us and say, "Did I get it right this time?" So that's what it was. There was a lot of laughter, and maybe it was because I didn't hear or wasn't ready to hear, and I think she spoke to other groups of adults and children and not to us, and that we ended on a good note. That to me, that my mother lived long enough and they saw their 4 grandchildren, bar bat mitzvah, and their daughters married to wonderful men, the joy and the hope and the promise that she really, she was committed to carry on, that there was a reason to live.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists tonight, Fern, Dory, Bernie, and Ariella. Thank you.
We're about to close the program. Please remain in your seats for one more moment. Hatikva. Yeah. Please remain in your seats one more time. I want to say everybody who did a wonderful job, and Ariella, you're welcome back anytime. So we want to end this evening on a note of hope. So I'm going to ask Aviva Reisky to come to the front and lead us in Hatikva. Please rise. Thank you again. Lech l'shalom. Go in peace. Good evening. Thank you.